Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Brilliant Professor-ish podcast slash vidcast, the Life Unleashed series. I am your host, Dr. Vernita White, and I go by Dr. V. And today we are going to dive into the thought-provoking documentary of Pretty Baby featuring Brooke Shields. Now, as a transformational life changer or life coach, as some may call it, I believe that every piece of media we consume can offer valuable insights and lessons for personal growth. Remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel, hit the notification bell, and leave your comments and thoughts down below. We love, and when I say we, the community, love hearing from you, our amazing viewers. Let's ignite a conversation and inspire each other to embrace resilience and overcome adversity, because I believe together we can create positive change in our lives and in the world. Be sure to check out the corresponding blog post for the show notes and highlights, and that information will be in the description box below. So let's explore some key life points we can take away from Pretty Baby. Now, I've been fascinated with documentaries and true crime stories since forever, and you'll start noticing a theme for the next few episodes. And I wanted to watch this documentary about Brooke Shields because I really don't know how she became famous. Well, I didn't before. I knew she was, but I really didn't know. And all I knew was that she was the woman with the amazing eyebrows. I knew that she was a friend of Michael Jackson. And because my grandmother had me watching tennis early on when I was younger, I knew she was the wife of a tennis pro. And the one thing I knew was that she was one of the most photographed, I think, children or people in the world at one point. But however, I didn't know all the details of the scenarios, nor did I really know how she got started in the industry. Now, this isn't a review about the documentary, but more like life lessons or lessons learned or things to think about along the way. And I'll share my overall thoughts, but then we'll get into the quote unquote lesson of the documentary. Now, I can't find my initial notes about the documentary, so I'll be going off memory. And if you have anything to add, be sure to put that down below. But remember, this isn't a reaction or an overview of the entire documentary. So it was interesting to learn that Brooke Shields was desirable as a child, just like she was already a grown woman. She played in films well beyond her years, and she was placed in situations where people only focused on her looks. Her mom was heavily criticized for allowing Brooke to play in certain movies, and we'll get into that later. But it's easier to judge now versus being in survival mode like they were at the time. I'm not saying that I agree, but how many of us would immediately stop something that was providing for our families if we didn't see the immediate or the initial harm at first? There was a backstory as to why her mom made certain decisions, and I also find it fascinating how Brooke wanted to be an actor since she was young, and that became her burning desire by any means necessary. And I saw that her mom wanted to make her daughter's dream come true. And if you are a parent, I'm pretty sure you can understand that. But how many of us have burning desires that lead us to do whatever it takes? All negative thoughts aside, we know that you accomplish that goal in a major way. And at the end of this series, I share some takeaways that I learned from Brooke's journey. I also found it interesting that she rose to this level of fame without the internet and was able to put a company on the map by wearing their jeans. And check out the documentary if you want to know that company. She was the ultimate influencer before it became a thing. Now, this may be unpopular, and that's okay, but as I was watching the documentary, I saw a lot of similarities between the journey of Brooke Shields and the journey of Kim Kardashian. You can love one and hate the other, but they both had the hunger for fame and the spotlight. They both had mothers who were instrumental in making their dreams come true, and both mothers have been criticized for the way they helped launch their daughters' careers. Both are now known for their looks, and both women have done things to branch out to show the world that they are more than what's beyond the physical. Okay, so this was not a comparison documentary, but I just thought it was very interesting. So I'll stop the comparison there, at least for a while, and feel free to draw your own conclusions. But I will say that Brooke had this level of innocence and naivety or naivete how do you say that word? That came with being a big star before social media, which I think was way harder to do back then. And she wasn't thriving off the drama that came in her life. Now, I will say that is a slight difference, but it is a fascinating documentary, and I do encourage you to go watch it. Now we'll get into the actual lessons. So, why the documentary is called Pretty Baby instead of The Life of Brooke Shields? Well, that was her claim to fame. Let's touch on some high points of the film. I have not watched the film, so these are the points that I've gathered from the documentary and other research through the lens of a life coach. So you may not agree with what I'm about to share, but that's okay too. That's what we're here for. So the movie Pretty Baby takes place in the early 1900s, exploring the controversial topic of child prostitution. Brooke was a real child in there too, and she had to have a relationship with a grown man. I believe she was 12 at the time, and her co-star, which she really had to have her first live kiss on camera, probably first kiss overall. And this dude was 29 in real life. But okay. So one key takeaway from this documentary is the importance of questioning and challenging societal norms and practices that we may take for granted. Although the film was set in the 1900s, it was in the real 1970s, which isn't too far removed. And it's essential to engage in critical thinking and advocate for change when necessary. And I know, like, when I was doing the research, some people now are like, well, why wasn't that film illegal? And it was the wording that they used. I think something under creative expression. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the film came out more like in Europe, in France or something like that. So their laws weren't as strict. And somehow in the studio production industry, the way it was worded was not kept it from being considered child pornography. So I just wanted to put that out there. Like it should be illegal, but it wasn't. And I think the statute of limitations, all of that, you can go research that. But in our daily lives, we often conform to societal norms without questioning them. So that's why I say be careful not to judge Brooke's mom in the situation for allowing her to take part of a film like that. I'm just saying that it could have been the norm at the time, but just because it was the norm doesn't mean it was right. But you got to think about how many times have we been in situations where we haven't challenged what was considered quote unquote the norm. And so as a challenge, I would encourage you to critically examine the beliefs and practices that you take for granted and ask yourself, are these norms truly aligned with my values? And are they promoting fairness, equality, and your well-being and the well-being of others? Without challenging the status quo, progress stagnates and marginalized voices remain unheard. And ignoring this life point can lead to a lack of social change, reinforcing oppressive systems and hindering collective growth. We see that to this day. But the actual movie Pretty Baby invites us to view the world through the eyes of the young protagonist, Violet, which is played by Brooke Shields. This reminds us of the incredible power of perspective. In the 1900s, this was normal, but taking it into real life, we have to understand the perspective of Brooke's mom for allowing her to play this role. Like I said before, notice I said understand and not agree. Both can be true at the same time. Sometimes seeing life through a different lens can lead to greater empathy, understanding, and ultimately positive change in our lives and in our communities. Now, consider the various perspectives you encounter on a regular basis. How often do you engage in conversations with people from different backgrounds, cultures, or age groups? Do you listen to their stories and experiences without judgment? Now, I invite you to challenge yourself to empathize and understand the point of view of others, even if it differs from your own. Now, you may think that you do, but if you really sit with yourself and examine all situations, you will find that there is room for growth and improvement. By broadening your perspective, you will gain new insights and foster greater compassion and tolerance. In today's society, and even when Brooke was on the scene, everyone was and is so focused on their point of view to be right instead of allowing other perspectives to be seen and be heard. Like, we all want to be right, but we all don't want to listen. When we do that, we fail to acknowledge and understand different perspectives. We become narrow-minded and intolerant. We like to say that we tolerate a lot, but we tolerate with an attitude, and that's not the tolerance that I'm talking about. But ignoring the power of perspective limits our capacity for empathy and compassion, which are crucial for building inclusive communities. And without embracing diverse viewpoints, we hinder personal and societal growth, contributing to division, prejudice, and discrimination. Yeah, it all comes from not understanding people. Now, next, we'll talk about navigating complex emotions. In the Pretty Baby in the documentary, it does tackle challenging emotions such as love, desire, loss, all of which Brooke had to navigate through the public eye. Now, I don't know about you, but it's challenging to handle my emotions sometimes in privacy in my own home. So I can't imagine at this point having to deal with a lot of things that I've had to deal with in the public eye. So here's an example of what Brooke had to deal with. As she was growing up and people have already seen her being portrayed in a certain way, people were so consumed about wanting to know if Brooke was still a virgin or not. Now, I know it may not seem like a big deal right now, but that is still a private conversation. And not only that, it's awkward and creepy when grown men are asking, knowing that they've seen you being portrayed in a certain way, like the movie Pretty Baby and Blue Lagoon. And to my understanding, Brooke didn't have someone she could talk to as she was going through all of this. She had to learn how to disassociate herself from what was happening. So it really didn't affect her until like years later. Those are her words from the documentary. And she saw everything as doing a job and she was able to switch it on and off. But the media wasn't able to do that. They just saw her like, oh, you were a child prostitute in the movie. Oh, you were in your coming of age, or you lost your virginity on the movie Blue Lagoon. And it was just it was weird when you think about it, especially during that time that the media couldn't separate the fact that she was acting. So think about you, like how would you process something like that is so personal in the public eye? And how well do you process your emotions now? And I believe it's crucial to acknowledge and process these emotions rather than suppress or ignore them because they could blow up in our faces. And understanding our own emotional landscape enables us to develop healthier coping mechanisms and build more fulfilling relationships. Sometimes we think that we're handling things when it could be buying too much, drinking too much, indulging in sexual activity too much, not eating, anything like that. We have to take a look at how we're dealing with situations. And are we actually dealing with them, or are we coping with them in a way to suppress them? And that's something to think about, especially as we're taking life lessons from this documentary. So in everyday life, we often suppress or ignore complex situations, which can lead to emotional distress and strained relationships. So I invite you to challenge yourself to acknowledge and explore your emotions without judgment. Don't be so hard on yourself. Acknowledgement is one of the first steps. So take time for self-reflection, journaling, and seeking professional help if needed, because there's nothing wrong with that. By cultivating emotional intelligence, you develop healthier coping mechanisms. Why can't I say that word? Enhance self-awareness and build more fulfilling connections. However, if you avoid this, understand that by suppressing or ignoring complex emotions, we deny ourselves the opportunity for growth and healing. Unaddressed emotions can manifest in unhealthy ways, such as increased stress, strained relationships, and mental health issues. Ignoring our emotional well being can lead to a lack of self awareness, hinder personal growth, and inhibit the development of healthy connections with others. You may not think you want to be around people, but as humans, we long for human connection. And if we're not able to manage our emotions, then people don't want to be around us. And then that sends us spiraling. Now, you can take that or leave that, but it's true. Now, going into our next point, we start talking about protecting and nurturing the vulnerable populations, in our society. The documentary sheds light on the vulnerability of children and the need to protect and nurture them. It reminds us of our responsibility as a society to ensure the safety and well-being of the younger generation. Now, I'm also going to include young adults as part of that younger generation because I believe Brooke still needed protecting, especially mentally and emotionally, when she went off to college and even right after she graduated. And unfortunately, as famous and as popular as she still experienced sexual violence that only came out, when she was talking in the documentary, and she was 22 years old. And I don't think a lot of people knew about that. That came from someone she thought who had her best interest in mind. I think it was like a Hollywood producer or director or something like that. And she thought she was just going for like a work meeting, and it ended up in that way. And I know I still needed a level of protection when I was in my early 20s. You could say that right now, but for sure, after college, and I'm grateful for my mother and grandparents who were my safety net. But everyone doesn't have that, and it's unfortunate. And knowing just that small part of Brooke Shields' life that we didn't know overall, as she was going through that, and then just watching her journey, it can inspire us to take action, volunteer or support organizations that work towards protecting children's rights, and then also young adults' rights. Well, human rights overall, but especially the vulnerable populations. And you can include elderly in there. Whoever you consider vulnerable, protect them at all costs. That's what I'll say. And so I want you to consider ways in which you can contribute to the well-being of vulnerable individuals, especially our children. I think sometimes there's a lot of focus on the public school system as a whole, but not the underlying issues children face before they get to school or even when they go home. Now, I also see that there is a lot of support and resources for like child hunger, sex trafficking, and now their rights to choose their genders, which is a different topic for another day. But there could also be more protection around the emotional and mental stability of a child that leads into healthy adulthood. Sometimes I think people forget that unstable children grow up as unstable adults in many cases, and we just can't release children out at a certain age and hope for the best. Now, I don't have all the answers, and I'm not pretending that will only solve the problems, but as a collective, I think a few of us do have a solution if we actually think about it and get into action. But in the meantime, I want you to think about, how often do you volunteer your time with local initiatives? I personally want to get back into the action of volunteering. I used to win awards for volunteering, and it wasn't on purpose. Like, I didn't set out to say, I'm going to have this number of hours when I volunteer, or I'm only going to volunteer at these particular places because I know I'm going to get attention. That wasn't the case, actually. My mom, from a young age, had instilled in me the importance of giving back and being an advocate for policies and practices that prioritize the safety and development of others. Now, she didn't say those exact words, but that's exactly what she taught me to do. And I find it interesting to see my transition from school teacher to now a life coach or advisor for many others, because it's all about the safety and development of others and being an advocate. Now, that was a little bit of a tangent, but I can see the spectrum of what happens when we don't have a holistic protection approach for our young and vulnerable populations. And that's what happened with Brooke Shields and so many others in the industry, and sadly, in so many parts of the world. As we keep talking about this topic of protecting and nurturing the vulnerable, when we neglect to protect and nurture them, especially the children, we perpetuate cycles of harm and hinder their potential. Ignoring this life point leaves vulnerable populations at risk of exploitation, abuse, and neglect. It erodes trust and can lead to long-lasting social and psychological consequences for both individuals and communities. In this industry of coaching, especially life coaching, so many blocks in a person's life come from childhood or early adulthood trauma. And that trauma isn't always quote unquote horrific, when we think about trauma. But according to the Trauma Informed Center Resource Center, trauma, and this is their definition, results from exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being, end quote. The Trauma Informed Care Center state that 62% of U.S. adults have at least one adverse childhood experience that results in trauma, and 25% of U.S. adults have had 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. And they call that ACEs. I know I've learned about that, having an education background. And if you're a counselor or a therapist, I'm pretty sure you learned about ACEs as well. And if you want to learn more about that, you can visit www.traumainformedcare.chcs.org for more information. Now, getting to our last life point about addressing taboo topics. Pretty Baby delves into a taboo subject matter that society often shies away from discussing openly. By bringing such topics to light, we can engage in important conversations, challenge societal stigmas, and work towards fostering a more inclusive and understanding environment. So in the documentary, there were conversations about child pornography, child abuse in the movie industry, alcoholism, domestic violence, drug use, and so much more. And in one part of the documentary, Brooke is having dinner with her husband and her daughters about the movies Pretty Baby and Blue Lagoon. And it was sort of heartbreaking to know that something she did so long ago was being brought up by her daughters, who had very strong opinions about how morally wrong those movies were. And when I looked at it, Brooke, she was shedding tears. On the one hand, she was so proud of the daughters that she had raised to have their own opinions and values, and how they were so open to be able to talk to their mom and dad. But on the other hand, it was like, oh my goodness, I have to have these, conversations. And to her, the whole time, Brooke, and I know some people judge her, but the whole time she was really not thinking that she was being abused in that way. It was really, she really talked about it was a role, and I know how to disassociate. So I understand where she is coming from. I get it. So that's something Brooke had to start talking about with her daughters. And I know we're getting back to another comparison. So it made me think about Kim Kardashian and what's been happening and the conversation she's gonna have to have soon, especially with her daughter Northwest. Now, I haven't been watching their series. I don't know if the conversation has taken place, but we all know how Kim really got started, and their whole lives have been in front of our faces, whether you watch them or not. Bits and pieces about them and how she got started, and that's a conversation she's going to have with her daughter. And I don't know if they'll film that conversation, but it will be interesting to see if, one, will she be proud of North for speaking out or speaking against or whatever, having her own opinion, or will she try to hide it? I don't know. I think it's just something that'd be interesting, to see. But I wonder, before we judge, is there something in our past that we would consider taboo? And if so, would you be able to have a conversation about it with your child or loved one, even if it meant being embarrassed or being questioned about why you did or didn't do something? Now, as a life coach, I serve as a buffer to my clients so they can clear those blocks without judgment. And sometimes you don't need to tell your inner circle or family certain things. You just need to get the energy out of your body so that you'll know that you're in a safe space and that you survived actually saying the words. So I'm not saying that go blab everything. You do need to get into a trusted space where you can share and then see if it's worth, telling other people. But it needs to come out of your body somewhere. On the other side, if it is something that needs to be addressed, then we can talk about going through the conversations and what needs to be in place so I can support my clients. And that's what I invite you to do as well. So my clients know that they have support to have these courageous, tough conversations. But I invite you to seek out a trusted buffer, and then, seek a professional to see like your next steps if it's a conversation you need to have. Now, personally, I've done this with my own coaches at retreats, and I've flown hundreds of miles to share some things with complete strangers, and I felt so much better. Now, I will say this, some things may require therapy, like I mentioned before, so make sure you get with the life coach who understands the difference between transformational coaching and therapy/counseling. All right, so I keep going on these tangents, but I do feel that someone needed to hear that. And if that's you, let me know down in the comments below. But in everyday conversations, we often shy away from discussing taboo topics due to discomfort or fear of judgment. Dave Chappelle calls society, quote unquote, brittle people. And he also says that America has gotten too soft. And I do agree with him. I believe we've gotten away from healthy conversations and debates. We think disagreement means hate, so we have a tendency to avoid certain conversations altogether. We also don't know how to communicate effectively, so active listening and making concise points have gone out the window. This is why certain topics can or cannot be addressed. No one wanted to talk about the possibility of child pornography when Brooke did those films because the director was being quote unquote creative, but not seen as a creepy old man. And no one challenged the situation of her nude photos that were taken of her. I think she was like 9 or 10 at the time. And of course, this seems outrageous to many of us now, but this is still happening, especially in that industry. Now, there are topics that are still not being addressed, but I don't want to make this episode any longer than what it needs to be. I do, however, invite you to challenge yourself to embrace open dialogue and create safe spaces for discussing sensitive topics. Please encourage respectful conversations where differing opinions are heard and considered. By tackling these taboo subjects, we promote greater understanding, empathy, and progress in our communities. You see how it all goes back to us connecting and being better humans. Now, if we shy away from addressing taboo subjects, we create an environment where important conversations are stifled. I want to point out that all quote unquote taboo topics may not be headlines in the making. For example, when I was a college professor, I noticed that the education department avoided sending students to their internships in a certain school that was literally 5 minutes from the university. It was a predominantly Black school and it was labeled as low income and low performing. Notice I said labeled. The students, I don't like to say, oh, those low performing students are low income students. No, that is what they categorize that particular school to be. Majority of the students in our education program at the time were white female students, and they were sending some of these students as far as 20 miles away from the university. But no one had ever questioned why this school that was 5 minutes away never made the list. Now, when I got there, I raised the issue. And after about a year or so of building rapport with the admin team at that school, I eventually got my students in there to do at least some observations, even if it wasn't their full internship. And of course, the department had all types of reasons as to why they weren't sending those students 5 whole minutes down the road. But it was obvious that this was racially motivated. And I'll think what you want, you weren't there. And I am the one who raised the issue and got the responses that I've gotten. I got a lot of pushback and there were obvious consequences, but it was worth exposing my students to this environment. And many of them were so grateful that I did. So ignoring these topics perpetuates ignorance, stifles progress, and allows harmful narratives to persist. And it prevents us from challenging deeply ingrained biases and prejudices, hindering personal and societal transformation. There was a lot of personal development work that needed to take place when I was a college professor, but I digress. So to wrap up these life points, as a life coach and educator, I believe it's essential to explore different perspectives and occasionally present unpopular opinions to encourage conversation and growth. The documentary Pretty Baby serves as a thought-provoking catalyst to address important societal issues and encourages us to reflect on our own beliefs, our own values, and our own actions. The more we learn and expand our understanding of the world, the more we can positively impact our lives and the lives of those around us. Challenging our thinking requires a willingness. I'll say that again. Challenging our thinking requires a willingness to step outside our comfort zones and confront our own biases. And everyone has them. I did a training before and people were like, I'm not biased. Yes, you are. All of us. It's just a matter of what you do with them. But again, I digress. We must embrace intellectual curiosity. We must seek diverse perspectives and be open to change. By doing so, we expand our own personal growth and we contribute to a more inclusive and progressive society. It's important to note that these challenges may not always be easy or comfortable, but they are essential for personal development and societal progress. By actively engaging with these points, we can spark meaningful conversations, we can challenge status quo, and we can inspire positive change in our lives as well as in the lives of others. By ignoring these life points, we miss out on opportunities for personal growth, positive change, and the development of a more just and compassionate society. It is essential to confront these challenges, even if they may be uncomfortable or unpopular, in order to create a better future for ourselves and future generations. Let's bring it down a level now, because I was up there and I don't want to lose you. We all want our everyday lives to be better than the day before, and that happens when we are personally better little by little more than we were yesterday. However, it is important to note that addressing these points requires courage, empathy, and a commitment to personal growth. By embracing these challenges, we have the potential to spark meaningful conversations and create a more inclusive and equitable world. So, in conclusion, I believe Brooke Shields' career is a testament to resilience and overcoming adversity. Remember, overcoming adversity and achieving success is a personal journey, and everyone's path is different. By applying these life lessons and takeaways from Brooke's experiences, we can cultivate resilience, embrace authenticity, pursue continuous learning, and maintain a positive mindset. With determination, self-belief, and a willingness to learn and grow, you can move forward in your own life and create a bright and fulfilling future. Well, that's all for today's episode. It is my hope that something I said challenged your thinking or made you say, As always, leave a comment down below to continue this conversation. And if you have not watched Pretty Baby, it should still be available on Hulu. So thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to live your life with intention, compassion, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. Why? Because you're brilliant and we need that special spark that's only inside of you. Thank you so much. And until next time, I'll see you on the other side. Bye.